So I'm going to walk you through the process of getting the data and figures for a presentation on a genus found in Wisconsin. I'm just going to basically walk you through the process using an example in the genus Sagittaria and hopefully show you how it comes together, show you the resources you can use to get the information you need. And you would do something very similar. You could track through all these same websites and resources to build the information you need for whatever group you're working on. So maybe first thing, I'll show you the paper resource I have. If you have the Wisconsin Flora book, that can be a good resource. And I'll just, I guess, hold that up for you there. So this is the section on Sagittaria in family Elismataceae. It looks like it's not focusing terribly well, so we might be might have to translate this for you. So what it tells me is I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 species. I tried to give you groups that have between 5 and 10 species. Sometimes as we'll maybe see, there are some species that are not as well represented. So we'll focus on the ones that are well represented in the state, ideally maybe ones that are native here, more likely to run into. Hoping this is something an exercise that becomes useful for you as you're maybe doing your own project. So this says solid Sagittaria rigida, Sagittaria graminea, Sagittaria montevidensis, and Sagittaria latifolia, Sagittaria cuneata, and Sagittaria brevirostra in here. So I'll maybe make a list of these somewhere. Just go over and share my screen again. So I've got some, just opened up a generic presentation here. Put some nice colors on it. So I can fill this in and say we have Sagittaria for the genus. And just for starters, maybe, I'm gonna add in our species here. So as I said, rigida, S. graminea, S. montevidensis, S. latifolia, S. cuneata, S. brevirostra. Okay, so I'll work with these species. I've also got on here maps. So the Wisconsin Flora has maps here. Maybe I'll make myself bigger again. So these have nice illustrations of the plants. Not every plant is illustrated, but good representative sampling. And then county maps of distribution in the state. I'll show you an electronic resource that will give you not only Wisconsin, but also North America for county maps. And that'll be useful as we get this going. So share that screen again. Okay, so we got our species outlined. Another place to check would be the Virtual Flora of Wisconsin, the WisFlora project, and search by genus. And if you click on the genus there, it's going to give you a list of the species. In general, I get comfortable using things alphabetized, so throw these into a quick alphabetic order. And that way I'll be able to compare them against the list I have and make sure I've accounted for everything. Let's go ahead and make them all italics while I'm at it. Okay, so I have a list, brevirostra, here's one, cristata not mentioned. Gonna have to look into that one. That's an interesting one that has big distribution in the state. And have to look into that. Sagittaria cuneata, graminea, latifolia, montevidensis, rigida. So everything's got a pretty good distribution in the state. These look to me more like natural distributions. So filling up adjacent counties in particular parts of the state, that can be useful for telling you got more of a natural distribution. Sometimes if you have an invasive or an escaped species, it shows up more patchwork across the state. So I'm curious here about our friend Sagittaria cristata. All right, so here's indication up here on the Wisconsin Flora site. Says it's a subspecies, Sagittaria, I'm sorry, not a subspecies, a variety, Sagittaria graminea, variety cristata. So what this means is that the Wisconsin Flora site, Flora of Wisconsin, is considering this to be its own species. But an alternative interpretation is that this is a variety of this other species, Sagittaria graminea. And that's useful. We can actually use that as an example for finding out if this is a division worth keeping. So now that I've made that observation, I actually just flipped back to my Wisconsin Flora book, and it shows me, where am I looking? Actually in the block here for Sagittaria graminea, it actually has sub-keys here to Sagittaria cristata, Sagittaria graminea. The paragraph says, Sagittaria graminea includes Sagittaria graminea variety cristata, sometimes treated as a separate species. And so if it's a separate species, that's how they would be distinguished. So there's some morphology in there to tell them apart. Let's look through our other resources and see if we get some agreement on that. And I'll use this also as an occasion to point out the other resources. So put a question mark in front of it. Sagittaria cristata. So maybe we'll start with Plants of the World Online. This has a couple of very nice features that I enjoy. It's, of course, Plants of the World, so it's going to give you a more global perspective. But let's see what happens here. So Sagittaria, usually it should be one result for the genus level. And then within the genus, we've got distribution, accepted species. So distribution, this is the global distribution of Sagittaria. So our species are not unique. They're not the only members of the genus. Would be the ones that are found in North America. They're found in other places. Maybe the same species we have here, maybe different species. That's part of the project, right? Over here also accepted species. So it gives you a summary value, 39 accepted species, if you wanted to put that into your presentation. Oh, that's no good. All right, I'm going to do a little, let's see, format, tools, view master. Okay. So I'm going to do a couple changes here. Click to edit master subtitle slide. Dun, 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 dun. So I made some changes on individual slides, but I'm going to change the master format here to match what I've got. I think students probably enjoy customizing their features a little bit. So I was using this kind of like an off-white color personally. So that should probably get us through. This has different levels of subdivision. And that's about all the more I end up using. I'm going to stretch this out to just in case. And we'll do that one. Okay. Slide. All right, so that should make it so that when I make a new slide, so new title and body slide, then it comes through with the formatting that I like. So you can change your fonts, change your colors, font color, page color, background. I like things pretty simple, and I leave the illustrations and the images to really speak for it. All right, so one thing you could do is you can just do a right click or control click. Pretty easy with the Google Slides format. You're also welcome to use PowerPoint. So I'm just going to do right click, copy image, and paste. So edit, paste. I'm pretty fond of keyboard shortcuts myself, so you might not see every button that I'm clicking. And we could just summarize here and say these are 39 species. So that's a start. I'm gonna, as I make these videos, just kind of leave some placeholder information in there. All right, so we were asking this question of which of these species we should accept. So these are, according to Plants of the World Online, these are accepted species. So we have Sagittaria brevirostra, I think maybe for good practice, I'm going to ask you to include the taxonomic authorities on these. I don't know if I chose the best font here. We're going to roll with it. All right, so this question is Sagittaria cuneata versus, Sagittaria cristata. So it's on here as an accepted species. If you remember, it had that sort of northern, I forget. It's got a distribution in Wisconsin. We'll find it. So it's an accepted species according to Plants of the World Online. And I think we'll just go ahead and keep that in there. So we're now up to 7 species. Really, I think you'll find the effort isn't much increased with every new species. So I'm going to put myself some placeholder pages on the spreadsheet. Sorry. Placeholder slides on the presentation. That's what I want to say for each species. So Graminia latifolia montevinensis rigida. So while you're doing this, you'll also get a feel for species that, basically how much of the diversity of this group is found in Wisconsin. And latifolia, did you latifolia? I did. Okay, montevinensis and rigida. So as I mentioned when we talked about the taxonomic authorities, people don't typically have these memorized or use them in conversation, but it's an important thing to keep track of just in case there's ever any uncertainty as to what name you're using. Just sort of reminds everybody that you're aware of the right way to use them. They're just so seldom used except in taxonomic publications, but they do show up, of course, in all these resources we're going to be looking at. They're in the Wisconsin Flora book. They're in the Plants of the World Online website. So they are important, even if we don't think much about them. Okay, so I think we can remove the question mark there. And I'll give these italicized and say species in Wisconsin. All right, so some things you'll probably be curious about as you've now got your species, right? So what do they look like and where do they grow? And one of the resources you can use is the Plants of the World Online website. This gives you, in the United States and Canada, gives you a state-by-state presence, absence. Really nice feature of Plants of the World Online is it also will tell you native versus non-native. So this purple region is supposedly introduced to California, Sagittaria brevirostra. Another resource that I like in the same vein is the Biota of North America program, the bonap.org website. And over on the left here, it says U.S. county level distributions, list plants by genera. So I can just go on here and do a search for Sagittaria. And that'll pull up all the species that are found in the United States. So you can see the distributions of species, not just ones that are found in Wisconsin, but also in other states. And then they're color coded also by whether they're native or non-native. The ones that are blue are strongly non-native, and then other colors also apply. There's a key you can link to here, map color key. So mostly native species, and say a good number of these, a little more on the Atlantic coastal plain, and relatively few that get into Wisconsin. So if you wanted to add to your species distributions, this might be one of the better ones. It might depend on if the species you're looking at, if it has a much wider distribution outside of Wisconsin, you might choose to put a world map up. If it has a relatively narrow distribution, you might want to just put the BONAP map up like this one. So I'm just gonna copy here for Sagittaria brevirostra, copy image, paste. So right now we're putting together the presentation. Later we'll actually deliver the presentation. So just kind of outline things in a way that makes them easier for you to talk about, some bullet points of text if you like that. Other features, we can go for images maybe. So another website we could use is Flora of North America project, Sagittaria. And this website has illustrations, but you sort of have to find your way to the illustrations. And I don't know a direct way to get right to them. So you can see which ones that we're interested in would be illustrated. So the general format, this is a text summary of the morphology of the genus, and then they have just a summary list of all the species. So this is North America, north of Mexico. So you can go directly to the species. There's also a key. The key will be an important part to your project as well. And a pretty big group of plants here. So dealing with just the ones in Wisconsin, you might find that a little bit easier. Okay, so I clicked on Sagittaria brevirasta. It gives me state level distribution. So that's also helpful. And then it did offer up an illustration. So the illustrations, they will come for a few species at a time, depending. This is has been a long project. So this is 10 or more years in the works. And sometimes these files, the illustration files, are labeled. Sometimes, like this one, they're not. And I don't know what they're, I don't know if there's a quick way to know what you're looking at other than maybe to use what you've learned about the differences between species and actually use that to find the right part of this image. So what it tells me down here is that 3 species are included on this illustration: Sagittaria brevirastra, Sagittaria cuneata, and Sagittaria rigida, which is actually pretty handy because those are 3 species that are on our list. So I think this is a smaller preview. You can click on original file, get a bigger one. Sometimes they're a little more grainy like this one. Sometimes they're a little sharper. This whole thing was a paper publication originally. So offhand, I don't know which one we're looking at just yet, but I can copy this whole image across to a few different species, and maybe that'll be helpful. Sagittaria rigida. So not every species is guaranteed to be illustrated. I guess as we go, we'll find out which ones are which. Right here, I think they're just in alphabetical order. The summary page here, so basically once we found this image file, it tells us we can go to another page, which is a summary of illustrations for the genus. And that would be helpful for finding which other species are illustrated. So it says Sagittaria montevidensis is included on this image. So whichever one that is, we can grab it. You don't have to use these illustrations, but I guess I'm sort of collecting useful, potentially useful illustrations for the meantime. Okay, and I think we've run out of ones that are local. So Isoetiformis, Papillosa, Platyphila, those are not species that we found in our list. I think Sagittaria montevidensis is that one. So I did a double click to enable the cropping, and then I just did a little slide over on the crop. So it's kind of a quick and dirty way to get an image there of Sagittaria montevidensis. So let's maybe just fill in and make sure we start getting data for everybody. Sagittaria cristata. So again, addressing that question of whether this is its own species, sure seems to be a lot of consensus that Sagittaria cristata really is its own species. So good for us. Sagittaria cuneata is coming out with a wider range. We might be interested to see if it has a big global range. So if you want, we can go back here and look at the list. Sagittaria cuneata, plants of the world online, distribution. So maybe that's useful. I don't know. Again, I'm going to crop this down to the region that has the green in it. So maybe not too remarkable just yet. But the BONAP map kind of cuts off at Canada, and this map shows us that it's actually pretty widespread through Canada. Maybe useful, and that shows the whole native range, which is kind of nice to be a little more comprehensive, I think. Sagittaria graminia, here's a more southern one. Copy image, paste. Sagittaria latifolia, that's a pretty widespread one. Copy image, paste. Sagittaria montevidensis. That's interesting. Huh. All right. I think we have some disagreement here, which is interesting. Sagittaria montevidensis is showing up as a non-native species only in the southeast. I happen to know from experience, I think I'm going to look into this species, Sagittaria calicina. And that might be the one. That one is found in Wisconsin and wasn't on our list. So I think we have a disagreement in how these species should be called. So exciting, maybe frustrating. Let's see what Plants of the World Online says. Kind of interesting, I think, in my experience, the Plants of the World Online, this is heavier on, the base of information is a little heavier on European plants. I forget where their other specialties are, maybe Africa, but I think that they sort of leave the North and South American species maybe to, I think they have some catching up to do a little bit later on this one. So could well be that there's not agreement on which ones these are. Okay. So this is interesting. I think this is new information for me. So this agrees, says Sagittaria montevidensis is in fact native to North America, including Wisconsin. It's also pretty widespread, so probably worthwhile to put the full native distribution on there. And so they don't have Sagittaria calicina on here. I'm going to just search for it. No results. Come on, you can do that. Huh, okay. Sorry, one more option is we could, accepted species, Sagittaria montevidensis. Look up synonyms in Sagittaria montevidensis, and also not coming out as useful. Let's go back to Flora of North America and see if Sagittaria calicina is not on here. Sagittaria montevidensis, let's look into this a little bit. Okay, so sometimes in here there is a list of synonyms or even a paragraph that describes what's going on. Here's something that's useful. So the key includes subspecies, Sagittaria montevidensis, subspecies calicina. So I think that probably answers our question. I think that helps illustrate what I was saying about the Plants of the World Online. It's a little bit deficient on North American plants, which I find kind of interesting. And I think that just means that the people who run this website out of the United Kingdom, I think they acknowledge that the people in North America are doing a good job of keeping track of the North American species. And someday later, maybe it's not a high priority for them, maybe someday later they'll merge these things together and come up with a global agreement. But certainly it's a big undertaking. It's relatively new, and not going to get everything in full agreement the first time. But I think we're getting there. It's pretty cool. I think in the next 10 years we'll have a global consensus of what those species should be called. Okay, so I think we can kind of ignore Sagittaria calicina, which puts us in an interesting spot here. I guess you could, if you're pulling these maps over from the BONAP site, I don't know what to tell you on this one. So the plants in Wisconsin are this supposed subspecies Calycina. I think that'd probably be worth mentioning as part of your project. So you could potentially pull these all over. I'm going to run out of room pretty fast here, but for starters, I'm a little curious. You know, they've got this map of the distribution, and it's somehow non-native to Florida, Georgia, Alabama, and yet native all everywhere else. So some kind of disagreement as far as what exists down here in the far southeast of the United States and what we should call it. Try not to leave you with too much confusion while you're doing this project, right? Okay, so subspecies, what was it? Montevendensis. So this could be there's just not agreement. Sorry, so subspecies italicized. Could be there's just not agreement yet on what to call these things. All these things. I noticed there was a third one, subspecies Spongiosa. And here's a synonym, Lophotocarpus spongiosus, Sagittaria spatulata. I'm just curious if any of these are on there. So Spongiosus spatulata. Okay, so Sagittaria spatulata is another potential subspecies. So you might run into some taxonomic issues with what do we call these things. Part of the project, you can help to resolve those or make them make sense for you. Subspecies Spongiosa. And I hopefully I've equipped you with the ability to look at some disagreements and not only just throw your hands up and say, this doesn't make sense, I don't know what to do, but really have the tools to go in and convince yourself one way or the other which names should be used. There's just one more, the IDIS website I mentioned earlier. This one doesn't always feel cutting edge to me. Sagittaria montevidensis. All right, so it says accepted. It also gives the subspecies as accepted. So I'm going to say this taxonomy agrees with Flora of North America, which also agrees with Plants of the World Online. And so the only one that's not agreeing is the Biota of North America site. And I don't know when this is all updated. This was a big undertaking. I don't know if it gets, well, there you go. Last updated 2014. Not to say these taxonomic changes were necessarily, standardized in the last 5 years, but maybe. Okay, let's hope that's maybe our more confusing one and we can move forward from here. Sagittaria rigida, here's another one. Boink, copy image, paste. I think it might be worthwhile, since we've done all these, just to double check the global distribution map. So we did Sagittaria brevirostra, only found in North America, pretty well summarized by this map here. Sagittaria cristata, pretty well summarized by the map. So I don't know if you can see them all, but I can see the names here. I'm just working my way down the list. Sagittaria cuneata, distribution, we did that one. Sagittaria graminea. Maybe not too much more to say about that one. So it's included in a couple of Canadian provinces, but probably not too important to add those onto our map right now. You can if you want. I don't know. I feel like I should. Copy it. Sagittaria graminea. Look at all the freedom to choose you have. All right, Sagittaria latifolia. I think that's pretty widespread. Let's find out. Fairly widespread. Copy image. So these areas in other parts of the world that are purple, they're places where species native to North America are considered invasive or escaped. You could mention those in your project if you want. Kind of interesting. I think we sometimes get hung up on our own invasive species, but our species sometimes are invasive in other places. Just one big trade worldwide. Sagittaria rigida. All right. Also pretty well summarized, but why not? I've been doing these for everybody else. All right, that was all a bad choice. Let me. We'll leave that there. Gotta leave Mexico in for context. Okay, so we got some morphology, some maps. And if you wanted to get more illustrations, there's a lot of websites you can go to get your illustrations. I think maybe the photographs would be nicer than illustrations. So the Wisconsin Flora Project has some photographs. Depending on the species, some of these are more common and would be better represented with photographs. Other ones a little bit harder to track down. Wisconsin Flora sometimes has some rather old photos on it too. So some of these are good. Open medium-sized image. Maybe I'll stop this video and then move on to one that highlights getting images for us. So let's stop this one and pick up on the next one.